The morning sun cast long shadows across the dying forests of Verdania Prime. Elder Thanel stood at the edge of what had once been the Great Garden, watching as another ancient tree crumbled to gray dust. The wind carried the ash across the valley, covering everything in a fine layer of death. The Kethmori had lived on this world for 3,000 years. They were not warriors or builders of great machines. They were gardeners, philosophers, and healers. Their tall, slender forms moved through the forests like living branches, tending to plants that grew nowhere else in the galaxy. Other species came from across the stars to learn from their wisdom about life and growth. But now, death was winning. Thanel touched the bark of a nearby tree. His long fingers, designed by evolution to sense the health of plants, felt only emptiness. The Grey Death had taken this one too. In 3 days, maybe 4, it would collapse into dust like all the others. "Elder, the council meeting begins soon," said Veltar, his young assistant. Her voice carried the fear they all felt but tried to hide. Thanel nodded and walked toward the communication center. It sat in the heart of their capital city, surrounded by buildings grown from living wood. Or what used to be living wood. Half the structures were already turning gray, their walls becoming brittle as paper. The communication array hummed to life, connecting Verdania Prime to the Galactic Council chambers on distant Nexus Station. The holographic display showed the representatives of the galaxy's most powerful species. Thanel had spoken to them many times before, but never with such desperate need. General Krex of the Vextar Empire appeared first. His species looked like walking armor, with thick metal-like skin and glowing red eyes. The Vextar had conquered half the known galaxy through pure military might. They respected only strength and viewed everything through the lens of war. Next came Director Zephlin of the Zephyrian Collective. The Zephyrians were tall and pale, with large heads that housed brains far more advanced than most species could imagine. They had turned science into an art form, building technologies that seemed like magic to lesser races. Finally, the ancient form of Wisdom Keeper Ethmor materialized. The Ethereal Collective claimed to be the oldest species in the galaxy. They looked like flowing energy more than solid matter, shifting between different forms as they spoke. They claimed to have transcended physical needs long ago. "Honored Council," Thanel began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "We come before you in our greatest hour of need. The Grey Death spreads across our world like wildfire. In 6 months, perhaps less, Verdania Prime will be uninhabitable." He gestured, and images of his dying world filled the display. Grey wastelands, where forests once stood, crumbling cities, Kethmori refugees fleeing to underground shelters. "We do not ask for charity," Thanel continued. "We offer fair trade, our botanical knowledge gathered over millennia, our philosophers' wisdom, our healers' skills. All we ask in return is help to save our world." General Krex was the first to respond. His metallic voice carried no emotion. "The Vextar Empire allocates resources based on strategic value. Your species contributes nothing to galactic security. We see no benefit in this arrangement." Thanel felt his heart sink but pressed on. "Director Zephlin, surely your advanced science could find a cure for this plague. We would share all our research freely." The Zephyrian's large eyes showed no warmth. "Our calculations indicate the cost of developing a cure would exceed any potential return on investment. The resources required could be better used elsewhere. Logic dictates we must decline." "Wisdom Keeper Ethmor," Thanel said, his voice beginning to crack. "Your people claim great wisdom. Surely compassion is part of that wisdom." The energy being shifted slowly before responding. "What you call compassion, we recognize as interference in natural selection. Species rise and fall by cosmic design. To interfere would be to disrupt the greater balance of the universe." The communication ended abruptly. Thanel stared at the empty display, feeling a cold emptiness spread through his chest. Around him, other Kethmori who had listened to the conversation began to quietly weep. "Elder," Veltar whispered, "what do we do now?" Thanel walked to the window and looked out at his dying world. In the distance he could see the gray zone spreading like a cancer. Every day it grew larger. Every day more trees died. Every day his people lost more hope. "We keep trying," he said finally. "We send our message to every corner of the galaxy. Someone, somewhere must care." Over the following weeks, the Kethmori broadcast their plea to hundreds of species. The responses were always the same. "Too expensive, too risky, not our problem." Some didn't even bother to reply. The hegemony of rigid order said helping would violate their laws about non-interference. The Free Traders Union calculated that a dead Verdania Prime might actually be worth more for its mineral rights. The Peaceful Alliance claimed they couldn't act without unanimous consent from all members, which would take years to achieve. As each rejection came in, more Kethmori fell into despair. Families that had tended the same groves for generations watched their life's work crumble to dust. Children asked their parents why the sky was turning gray, and the adults had no answers. Thane L spent his days visiting refugee camps, trying to bring comfort to his people. The camps were growing larger every day as more areas became uninhabitable. Food was becoming scarce as the Grey Death killed their crops. Clean water was harder to find as the plague contaminated their rivers. "Elder, we have enough supplies, for maybe 2 months," reported Marvell, their chief administrator. After that, she didn't need to finish. They all knew what came after that. That night, Thanel stood alone on the roof of the communication center. Above him, the stars shone as bright as ever, but they seemed cold and distant. Somewhere out there were millions of intelligent species, living on thousands of worlds, yet not one would lift a finger to help. He activated the communication array one final time. This would be their last broadcast. They had nothing left to offer, no bargains left to make. This was simply a goodbye. "To anyone who might be listening," he began, his voice carrying across the void. "This is Elder Thanel of the Kethmori people. Our world is dying, and we have been told that this is simply the way of things. That some species rise while others fall, and interference would upset the cosmic balance. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps our time has ended. We do not ask for salvation anymore. We know it will not come. We ask only that someone remember us. Remember that we lived, that we loved our world, that we tried to make the galaxy a little more beautiful. In our archives you will find 3,000 years of botanical knowledge, cures for diseases that plague a dozen worlds, techniques for growing food in places thought barren, the wisdom of generations who believed that life was sacred. We give this knowledge freely to anyone who will use it to help others. Maybe our death can still bring life to someone else. Maybe that is enough." The transmission ended. Thanel powered down the array and walked home through streets filled with refugees and despair. He did not know that his words were racing across the galaxy at the speed of light, carrying his people's final plea into the void. He did not know that someone was listening. He did not know that help was already on the way. Captain Sarah Chen was reviewing supply reports when the communication alert sounded on the bridge of the UES Defiance. She looked up from her tablet, wondering who would be sending messages to a human patrol ship in the Outer Rim. "Captain, we're picking up a distress signal," reported Lieutenant Torres from the communication station. "It's not directed at us specifically. Looks like a general broadcast." Sarah frowned. "From who?" "Species I've never heard of, ma'am." "The Kethmori. They're asking for help." Something in Torres's voice made Sarah pause. She had served with him for 3 years and knew he wasn't easily shaken. "Put it through the speakers." Elder Thanel's voice filled the bridge, speaking of a dying world and a people abandoned by the galaxy. As the message played, Sarah watched, her crew's faces change. The casual chatter stopped. People turned from their stations to listen. By the time the transmission ended, the bridge was completely silent. "How far away is their world?" Sarah asked quietly. "Verdania Prime is about 4 days at maximum warp, Captain." Sarah made her decision quickly. "Set course for Earth, maximum speed." The Defiance reached Earth's solar system 18 hours later. Sarah had spent the entire journey reviewing everything they knew about the Kethmori. It wasn't much. Humanity had only been part of galactic society for 50 years, and they were still considered newcomers by most species. The Kethmori were mentioned in their cultural databases as peaceful plant specialists who kept to themselves. Sarah transported directly to Geneva, where the United Colonial Command had its headquarters. She burst into Admiral Marcus Webb's office, without waiting for permission, something that would have gotten her court-martialed in the old Earth navies. "Admiral, we need to talk." Webb looked up from his desk. He was a big man with gray hair and tired eyes, someone who had seen too much war in his lifetime. "Sarah, what's got you so worked up?" She played Thanel's message. Webb listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each word. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Have you checked with the Galactic Council?" he asked. "They've already refused multiple times. The Vextar, the Zephyrians, the Ethereals. Everyone with the power to help has said no." Webb stood and walked to the window overlooking Lake Geneva. What kind of help are they asking for? Medical supplies, scientific assistance, maybe evacuation support. The message wasn't specific about the plague itself, but it sounds biological. Do we have anyone who might understand this gray death? Sarah had already thought about this. Dr. Elena Vasquez at the Mars Research Station. She's our best xenobotanist. If anyone can figure out what's killing their plants, it's her. Webb turned back to face her. Sarah, you know what the other species think of us. We're the junior partners, the newcomers who don't understand how things work. If we go charging in to help when the major powers refused, then we prove we're different, Sarah interrupted. Admiral, I've read the reports from our first contact missions. Every time the other species are surprised by how we act, they expect us to follow their rules about who matters and who doesn't. Maybe it's time to show them that humans don't abandon people. Webb was quiet again, thinking. Through the window, Sarah could see families walking by the lake, children playing in the sun, normal people living normal lives, unaware that somewhere across the galaxy an entire species was dying while the universe looked the other way. The Galactic Council won't like this, Webb said finally. Do we care? He smiled then, the first real smile Sarah had seen from him in months. Get Dr. Vasquez on a transport to your ship. I'll start mobilizing whatever fleet we can spare. Sir, how many ships are we talking about? All of them. Sarah stared at him. All of them? Admiral, that's our entire deep space fleet. If something happens closer to home, Captain, there are 8 billion humans on Earth in the colonies. We have maybe 20 ships capable of interstellar travel. Against the kind of forces the major powers can field, 20 ships or 200 wouldn't matter if they decided to attack us. He walked to his desk and activated the communication system. But Sarah, there's something the big powers don't understand about humanity. We don't calculate whether helping someone is worth the cost. We just help. The next few hours passed, in a blur. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived at the Defiance with a team of scientists and enough medical equipment to stock a small hospital. More ships began arriving in Earth's solar system. Destroyers, frigates, even converted cargo haulers fitted with weapons and medical bays. Sarah found Dr. Vasquez in the ship's laboratory, studying the data they had on the Gray Death. The scientist was a small woman with intense dark eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. What do you think, Doctor? Sarah asked. Elena looked up from her microscope. It's definitely biological, but there's something strange about it. The way it spreads, the speed of infection. This doesn't look entirely natural. What do you mean? Natural plagues usually have some kind of pattern, some logic to how they attack living systems. This Gray Death seems designed to target the specific biology of the Kethmori's plant life. That suggests what? Elena's face was grim. That someone made this. Someone wanted the Kethmori gone. Before Sarah could respond, Lieutenant Torres's voice came over the comm system. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Nexus Station. It's the Galactic Council. Sarah and Elena hurried to the bridge where the holographic display showed General Krexth's armored form. His red eyes seemed to glow brighter than usual. Captain Chen of the human vessel Defiance, he said, his voice cold as space. You are ordered to stand down immediately. The matter of Verdania Prime has been decided by proper authority. General, with respect, humanity wasn't part of that decision. Humanity is a junior species with no standing in galactic affairs. You will return to your territory immediately or face the consequences. Sarah felt her crew watching her. She thought about Elder Thanol's voice, asking not for salvation, but simply to be remembered. She thought about the families by Lake Geneva, living in a universe where people could watch others die and call it natural selection. General Krexth, she said clearly, humanity respectfully declines. The Vextar's eyes flared. You dare defy the Galactic Council? We dare to help people who need help. If that's defiance, then yes, we defy you. The transmission cut off abruptly. Around the bridge, her crew stood a little straighter. Elena smiled and returned to her laboratory. Lieutenant, Torres began tracking the position of every human ship in the fleet. Captain, Torres reported, Admiral Webb is broadcasting on all human frequencies. He's calling for volunteers. Sarah activated the comm system and heard Webb's voice echoing across human space. This is Admiral Webb to all Earth, forces and colonial ships. We have received a distress call from a dying world. The galactic powers have decided these people aren't worth saving. Humanity disagrees. He paused, and Sarah could hear the weight of decision in his voice. We're going to help them. Not because it's profitable or strategic or logical. We're going to help them because it's right. Because when someone asks for help, humans don't turn away. Any ship that can make the journey is welcome to join us. Earth remembers its friends. The response was immediate. Cargo ships changed course toward Verdania Prime. Passenger liners volunteered to help with evacuations. Even the small system defense boats began forming up, knowing they were too slow for interstellar travel but unwilling to be left behind. Sarah looked out at the growing fleet and felt something she hadn't experienced since joining the space service. Pride. Not in humanity's technology or military might, but in who they were as a species. Lieutenant Torres signaled the fleet, "Set course for Verdania Prime. Captain, the Galactic Council will send forces to stop us." Sarah thought about Thanel's message, about a people who had given up hope because the universe had taught them that compassion was weakness. "Then we'll show them what human compassion looks like when it's threatened," she said. "All ships, maximum warp. It's time to prove that someone in this galaxy still cares." The human fleet dropped out of warp at the edge of the Verdania system and found a world that was dying before their eyes. From space, Verdania Prime looked like it was covered in spreading gray scars. What should have been green continents were half dead, with brown and gray patches eating away at the remaining forests like a cancer. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiance, staring at the planet below. The sight was worse than any of the recordings had shown. "Lieutenant?" Torres scanned for population centers. "I'm reading massive underground installations, Captain. Looks like most of the population has moved below ground. Surface cities show minimal life signs." Dr. Elena Vasquez joined Sarah at the viewing screen. "It's spreading faster than their reports indicated. At this rate, the entire planet will be uninhabitable within weeks, not months." Before Sarah could respond, a new signal appeared on their sensors. Ships were approaching from the outer system, but these weren't human vessels. The sleek angular designs could only belong to one species. "Vextar battle fleet," Torres reported, his voice tight with tension. 12 heavy cruisers and support vessels. They're moving to intercept us." Sarah activated the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is Captain Chen. We knew this moment would come. Remember why we're here. We don't fight for conquest or glory. We fight so that good people don't die alone." The Vextar fleet arranged itself between the humans and Verdania Prime. General Krexth's image appeared on the main screen, his metallic features twisted with anger. "Human vessels, you will withdraw immediately or be destroyed. This is your final warning." Sarah looked around her bridge. Her crew was scared but determined. Behind her, 20 human ships held position, facing odds that would have sent most species running. "General, we're not leaving. If you want to stop us, you'll have to go through us." "So be it." The battle began with a storm of energy weapons. The Vextar ships were larger, more advanced, and far more heavily armed than anything humanity could field. The first exchange destroyed 3 human vessels and barely scratched the enemy's shields, but the humans fought like nothing the Vextar had ever seen. Instead of maintaining formation, they scattered into small groups using tactics that seemed chaotic but proved devastatingly effective. Captain Johnson of the Armstrong rammed his damaged frigate into a Vextar cruiser's engine section. "Commander." Patel of the Mumbai used her ship's cargo bay to launch improvised missiles. The Defiance darted between enemy ships like a mosquito, too small and fast to target easily, but carrying weapons that could damage the larger vessels. Sarah watched her tactical display as more human ships were destroyed, but noticed something else. The Vexitar were taking damage too. "Captain!" Torres shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "We're receiving a signal from the planet's surface." On the screen, Elder Thanel appeared. His tall form looked even thinner than before, and his skin had taken on a gray pallor that matched his dying world. Behind him, Sarah could see Kethmori children watching with wide, frightened eyes. "Unknown ships, please identify yourselves," Thanel said, his voice weak with exhaustion. Sarah stepped forward. "Elder Thanel, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship Defiance. We received your message. We're here to help." The change in Thanel's expression was immediate. The despair lifted from his features, replaced by something Sarah had rarely seen in her years of space travel. Pure, overwhelming hope. You came?" he whispered. "But the Council said." "The Council doesn't speak for humanity," Sarah replied as weapons fire exploded around her ship. "We stand with you." Tears began flowing down Thanel's face. "How many ships did you bring?" Sarah hesitated. Against the might of the Galactic Council, 20 ships seemed pathetically small. "All of them," she said finally. We brought all of them. The battle raged for hours. The human fleet fought with desperate courage, but the outcome seemed inevitable. Half their ships were destroyed or disabled, and the Vextar were closing in on Verdania Prime. Then Dr. Vasquez made her breakthrough. "Captain," she called from the laboratory, "I need to get to the planet's surface immediately. I think I know what's causing the Gray Death." "Doctor, we're in the middle of a battle." "Sarah, listen to me. This isn't a natural plague. Someone engineered this to target Kethmori plant biology specifically. If I'm right, I can not only cure it but turn it back on itself." Sarah made a decision that would have horrified any military strategist. She broke off from the main battle and dove toward the planet's surface, using the Defiance's small size to slip past the Vextar blockade. They landed near one of the underground cities, where Thane L was waiting with a group of Kethmori scientists. The moment Dr. Vasquez stepped off the ship, she began working with the intensity Sarah had never seen before. "Show me everything," Elena told the Kethmori researchers. "Every test, every sample, every theory you've tried." What followed was the most remarkable collaboration Sarah had ever witnessed. Human stubbornness and refusal to accept defeat, combined with Kethmori wisdom and deep understanding of plant biology. Elena worked for 36 hours straight, sustained by stimulants and determination. "I've got it," she finally announced, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "The Gray Death targets specific genetic markers in Kethmori plants, but I can modify it to attack the plague itself instead of the plants." "How long will it take?" Thanel asked. "With your people helping, maybe 12 hours to produce enough to treat a test area." Above them, the space battle continued. More human ships fell, but Admiral Webb's voice kept broadcasting across all frequencies. "Hold the line. Every minute we buy them is another chance to save this world." Elena and the Kethmori scientists worked through the night. Sarah split her time between helping with the cure and coordinating with the fleet above. The situation was desperate. Only 6 human ships remained operational, and Vextar ground forces were preparing to land. Then, at dawn on the second day, they were ready. "This should work," Elena said, holding up a container of what looked like ordinary soil. "We introduce it to the root systems of surviving plants and it should spread just like the original plague. But instead of killing, it heals." They chose a test area on the edge of the gray zone, where dead trees stood like gray skeletons against the sky. Elena and several Kethmori spread the treated soil around the base of the nearest dead tree. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, green began to appear at the tree's base. New shoots pushed up through the gray dust. Color returned to bark that had been dead for months. "It's working," Thanel whispered. Around them, other Kethmori began to weep with joy. But their celebration was interrupted by the sound of approaching ships. Vextar ground forces were landing nearby, and Sarah could see armed soldiers marching toward their position. "Elena, how fast can we spread this cure? We need to get to the major root networks. If we can treat the central grove systems, it should spread across most of the continent within days." Sarah looked at the approaching Vextar forces, then at her small team of humans and Kethmori. The odds were impossible, but that had never stopped humans before. "Then that's what we do," she said, checking her weapon. "Thaniel, get your people to the grove systems. Elena, grab as much of the cure as you can carry." The elder looked at her with concern. "Captain, there are too many of them. You cannot fight them all." Sarah smiled, thinking of the human fleet above, fighting impossible, odds to buy them time. "Elder, you're about to learn something about humans. We don't calculate whether we can win, we just fight for what's right." As the Vextar forces closed in, Sarah and her small team prepared to make their stand. Behind them, the first treated tree continued to grow, its new leaves bright green against the gray sky, a symbol of hope in a dying world. The Vextar soldiers advanced across the gray wasteland like a metallic tide. Their powered armor gleamed in the pale sunlight, and their energy weapons hummed with lethal power. Against them stood Captain Sarah Chen, with 6 human Marines, Elder Thanel with a handful of his people, and Dr. Elena Vasquez clutching containers of the cure that could save an entire world. "Spread out," Sarah ordered her small team. "Make them work for every meter. Our job is to buy time." Above them, the space battle continued to rage. Admiral Webb's voice crackled through Sarah's comm unit. "Sarah, we've got more ships incoming. Not ours, but you're not going to believe this." Before she could ask what he meant, the first shots rang out. Sarah's Marines took cover behind the skeletal remains of dead trees and began returning fire. Their weapons were crude compared to Vextar technology, but humans had learned to make every shot count. Elena and the Kethmori scientists scattered toward different grove systems, carrying the precious cure. They moved through the wasteland, like ghosts, using their knowledge of the terrain to stay ahead of the enemy search parties. The first assault lasted 3 hours. Wave after wave of Vexitar soldiers pushed forward, only to be met by fierce resistance from defenders who refused to give ground. Sarah watched 2 of her Marines fall, but they had bought Elena the time she needed to reach the first major route. Network. Treatment completed Grove 7. Elena's voice came through the comm. Moving to Grove 12. Behind the advancing Vextar forces, something remarkable was happening. Where Elena had spread the cure, green was returning to the wasteland. Plants thought dead for months began to bloom again. Trees that had stood as gray monuments to despair suddenly burst forth with new life. General Krext himself landed with the next wave of attackers. His massive form strode through the battlefield, energy cannon blazing. When he saw Sarah crouched behind her makeshift barricade, he stopped and raised his weapon. "Human captain, your resistance ends now. Surrender, and I will make your death. Quick!" Sarah looked around at what remained of her team. 3 Marines, Elder Thanel, and a handful of Kethmori, who had refused to abandon the Grove systems. Against them stood hundreds of the galaxy's most feared soldiers. "General," she said, standing up slowly, "I've got a better idea. Why don't you surrender to us?" Krexith's laugh sounded like grinding metal. "You face the might of the Vextar Empire with a handful of primitives and plant tenders. What could you possibly threaten me with?" Sarah smiled and pointed behind him. "Look around, General. What do you see?" For the first time, Krexith turned to survey the battlefield. His red eyes widened as he took in the sight. Everywhere Elena had spread the cure, life was returning. But more than that, the treated areas were growing at an impossible rate. Trees were reaching toward the sky. Flowers were blooming in brilliant colors, and grass was spreading like a green wave across the gray wasteland. "The cure doesn't just heal," Sarah explained. "It makes everything stronger than before. And General, we've been very busy while you've been chasing us around." Elena's voice crackled through the comm again. "All major Grove systems treated. The network is complete. What happened next would be talked about across the galaxy for generations." The cure spread through Verdania Prime's interconnected root systems faster than anyone had imagined possible. Gray zones began turning green at a speed that defied natural law. Dead forests exploded back to life with a vigor that made them more beautiful than they had ever been. But the most shocking development came from space. Admiral Webb's voice filled Sarah's comm unit. "Sarah, you need to see this. We're receiving signals from across the sector. Ships are dropping out of warp all around the system." Through her ship's sensors, Sarah watched in amazement as dozens of vessels appeared. These weren't human ships or Vextar warships. They came from species she barely recognized. The massive, gentle titans of Proxima Centauri, the insectoid engineers from the Spiral Arm, the crystalline singers from the Outer Rim. "Captain Chen," came a transmission from the lead ship. "This is Commander Vextal of the Proxima Defense Force. We received word that humans were making a stand against the Council's abandonment policy. We want to help." More ships kept arriving. Species that had been dismissed as minor powers by the Galactic Council were joining the defense of Verdania Prime. The human fleet, reduced to just 4 operational ships, suddenly found itself at the center of an armada. General Krext watched, his tactical advantage evaporate as the combined fleet engaged his forces. The Vextar had expected to face desperate humans and maybe some Kethmori civilian vessels. Instead, they found themselves outnumbered 3-1 by species they had never considered threats. "This is impossible," Krext snarled. "These species have no unity, no organization. They would never work together." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "They wouldn't work together for conquest or profit or political advantage, but they'll work together for something you never understood, which is the right thing." The battle turned quickly after that. The combined fleet fought with a coordination that surprised everyone, including themselves. Species that had never worked together before found ways to complement each other's strengths. The massive Titan ships provided heavy firepower while the swift engineer vessels darted between enemy formations. The Singers used their crystalline hulls to create interference patterns that confused Vextar targeting systems. On the planet's surface, General Krexith found himself facing a very different situation than when the battle began. The gray wasteland had transformed into a lush paradise that seemed to pulse with life. His soldiers, bred for combat in sterile environments, were struggling to maintain formation as vines and branches seemed to actively impede their movement. "The planet itself is fighting us," one of his lieutenants reported. "The plants are growing too fast, changing the terrain faster than we can map it." Elena appeared from behind a flowering tree that definitely hadn't been there an hour earlier. "That's because they're protecting their friends," she called out cheerfully. "Turns out when you heal something instead of harming it, it remembers." The final moment came when Thanel emerged from the forest that had grown around them during the battle. The Kethmori elder no longer looked like a broken refugee from a dying world. He stood tall and proud, surrounded by plants that seemed to lean toward him like old friends greeting a beloved visitor. "General Krex," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who spoke for an entire world. "You came here to enforce the Council's decision that my people should die, but I think you'll find that decision has been overruled." Above them, the space battle was ending. The Vextar fleet, faced with overwhelming odds and cut off from reinforcements, was withdrawing. Admiral Webb's voice echoed across all frequencies. "This is Admiral Webb to all vessels. Verdania Prime is secure. The Kethmori people are safe." But Webb wasn't finished. His next words would reshape galactic politics forever. "To any species listening to this transmission, today we proved something important. We proved that compassion isn't weakness. We proved that protecting the innocent isn't naive idealism. We proved that when good people stand together, they can face down any bully." He paused, and Sarah could hear the weight of history in his voice. "The old Galactic Council says some species matter more than others. They say that helping the weak is inefficient. They say that letting people die is just natural selection. Well, humanity has an answer to that philosophy. We reject it completely." General Krexith stood in the middle of what had become a garden paradise, surrounded by species he had dismissed as unimportant. His tactical display showed Vexitar ships retreating across the system, while the combined fleet held position around Verdania Prime. For the first time in his military career, he was looking at defeat. Not just tactical defeat, but the defeat of everything his empire had taught him about power and control. Sarah walked over to him, her weapon lowered but ready. "General, you can report back to the Council that their days of deciding who lives and dies are over. There's a new alliance forming, and it's built on principles they never understood." Krexith looked around at the impossible scene. A world reborn, enemies become allies, and the weak somehow becoming strong enough to challenge the mighty. "What principles?" he asked, genuinely confused. Sarah smiled, thinking of her crew who had fought impossible odds, of Elena who had worked without sleep to save strangers, of Admiral Webb who had risked humanity's entire fleet for people they had never met. That every life has value, General. That no one should face extinction alone. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply say, "We stand with you." 6 months after the Battle of Verdania Prime, Captain Sarah Chen stood in what had once been the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Station. The massive hall was nearly empty now, with only a few scattered representatives from species still loyal to the old order. The transformation had been swift and complete. Within days of humanity's stand at Verdania Prime, species after species had withdrawn from the Council. The recordings of Admiral Webb's final transmission had spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carrying a simple message that resonated with billions of beings. No one should face extinction alone. Sarah was no longer just a captain. The new Galactic Union had promoted her to Admiral, making her one of the youngest flag officers in known space. But titles mattered less than results, and the results spoke for themselves. Elder Thainzel joined her at the observation deck overlooking the station's docking bays. His people had not only survived but thrived beyond anyone's expectations. Verdania Prime was now more beautiful than it had ever been, its forests growing with a vitality that attracted botanists from across the galaxy. "The last Council loyalists are preparing to leave," Thanel observed, watching as Zephyrian ships undocked from the station. Director Zephlin looked disturbed during the final session. Sarah nodded. The Zephyrians had tried to calculate their way out of irrelevance, but mathematics couldn't solve the problem they faced. Their advanced technology meant nothing when no one wanted to trade with them anymore. Species after species had chosen to work with the Union instead, sharing resources and knowledge freely, rather than paying the Zephyrians increasingly desperate prices. "What about the Vextar Empire?" Thaniel asked, still retreating to their core worlds. General Krext sent a message last week requesting a meeting with Union representatives. I think they're starting to realize that conquest doesn't work when everyone else is allied against you. Through the observation deck's massive windows, they could see the new reality of galactic politics. Ships from dozens of species docked peacefully alongside each other. The insectoid engineers worked with human technicians to repair vessels damaged in border skirmishes. Proxima and Titans shared medical knowledge with Kethmori healers. The crystalline singers had even begun teaching their harmonic mathematics to species that had never heard music before. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached them, carrying a data tablet and looking pleased with herself. The latest reports from the agricultural worlds, she announced. Crop yields are up 30% across Union space, and we've successfully treated plague outbreaks on 12 different worlds using variations of the Verdania cure. The cure that had saved Verdania Prime had turned out to be more revolutionary than anyone imagined. The partnership between human innovation and Kethmori botanical wisdom had created not just a treatment for the Grey Death, but a whole new approach to healing diseased ecosystems. Dead worlds were blooming again. Barren moons were becoming gardens. Any word from the Ethereal Collective? Sarah asked. Elena's expression darkened. They're still claiming that our interference with natural selection will cause cosmic catastrophe. But their predictions keep failing to come true. Hard to maintain moral authority when the universe keeps proving you wrong. Sarah smiled at that. The Ethereals had been the most shocked by the galactic transformation. For millennia, they had presented themselves as wise guides helping younger species understand the natural order. The idea that compassion and cooperation could be more effective than their cold philosophy had shaken them to their core. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. The holographic display showed a species Sarah didn't recognize. Tall, blue-skinned beings with large eyes and graceful movements. Greetings, Union representatives, the lead figure said. I am Ambassador Velthera of the Cerulean Republic. We have been following your activities with great interest. Ambassador, Sarah replied formally. How can the Union help you? Our neighboring system is being threatened by a stellar plague that's destroying inhabited worlds. The old council refused our requests for aid, claiming the cost was too high. We hoped, that is, we wondered if the Union's approach might be different. Sarah exchanged glances with Thanel and Elena. This was the 14th such request they had received in the past month. Word was spreading that the Union actually helped people in need, and desperate species were seeking them out. Send us all your data on the stellar plague, Sarah said. We'll have research teams working on it. Within hours, the Cerulean ambassador's relief was visible. Thank you. We had heard stories about what happened at Verdania Prime, but we hardly dared to hope. Ambassador, Thaniel interrupted gently, hope is exactly what the Union is built on. No one faces extinction alone while we exist. After the transmission ended, Elena pulled up a star chart showing Union space. What had started as a desperate defense of one world had grown into an alliance spanning half the known galaxy. Green dots marked Union member species, while red dots showed the remaining Council loyalists. The green vastly outnumbered the red. It's remarkable how quickly things changed, Elena mused. 6 months ago, the major powers controlled everything. Now they're isolated and losing influence every day. Fear was always their primary tool, Sarah replied. Once people realized there was an alternative, the choice became obvious. A new transmission alert sounded, this one marked with the highest priority codes. Admiral Webb's face appeared on the display, looking older but more satisfied than Sarah had seen him since the war began. Sarah, I have news that's going to interest you. We just received a formal communication from the Vextar Empire. General, Kraxith wants to discuss terms for joining the Union. Sarah felt her eyebrows rise. The Vextar want to join us? Apparently, their empire is collapsing. When you build your entire society on conquest and intimidation, it turns out you're in trouble when everyone else stops being afraid of you. Their outer colonies are declaring independence and requesting Union membership. Krexith sees the writing on the wall. Thanel leaned forward with interest. What are you going to tell them? Webb's smile was grim. Same thing we tell everyone who wants to join. Renounce conquest as a form of policy. Commit to mutual aid and defense. Accept that all species have equal voice in Union decisions. If they can do that, they're welcome. Think they'll agree? Elena asked. I think they don't have much choice, Webb replied. The alternative is continued isolation while their empire crumbles around them. After Webb's transmission ended, the three friends stood quietly, contemplating how much had changed. Sarah remembered the desperate journey to Verdania Prime. when humanity's entire fleet consisted of 20 outdated ships facing impossible odds. Now the Union fleet numbered in the thousands, with new ships joining every week as more species contributed to their common defense. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't received your message, Sarah said to Thaniel. If humanity had remained isolated in our little corner of space. The Kethmori elder smiled, his expression peaceful. But you did receive it, and you came when no one else would. That says something fundamental about your species, Sarah. You don't abandon people. It says something about yours too, Sarah replied. You kept broadcasting hope even when you had no reason to believe anyone was listening. Elena looked up from her data tablet. Actually, I've been analyzing the communication patterns from that time period. Thaniel's final message was received by over 3,000 species. Humanity was the only one that responded. 3,000? Sarah felt a chill. You mean 3,000 different species heard you asking for help and only we? Only you came, Thaniel finished softly. Only you said the words that changed everything. We stand with you. They were interrupted by another alert, this one from the Union's deep space monitoring stations. A young technician appeared on screen, barely containing his excitement. Admiral Chen, you need to see this. We're receiving distress calls from the Andromeda sector, 3 different species reporting various crises. But here's the interesting part. They're not calling for help from the old council. They're specifically requesting Union assistance. Sarah looked at her friends and felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The Union had grown beyond anything they had imagined, but with that growth came endless demands for help. Every day brought new crises, new species seeking aid, new challenges that tested their commitment to their founding principles. Plot courses for the fastest ships we have available, she ordered, and send a message to all Union members, anyone, who can spare resources for humanitarian aid should rendezvous at the crisis coordinates. As the technician signed off to begin coordinating the relief effort, Sarah turned back to the observation deck. Outside, the docking bays were already showing increased activity as Union ships prepared for another rescue mission. Think we'll ever run out of people to help? Elena asked. Sarah thought about that question seriously. In the old galaxy, under the Council's rules, help was rationed based on political and economic calculations. Species lived or died based on whether saving them was deemed worthwhile by those in power. But the Union had proven a different truth. The galaxy was vast enough and rich enough to help everyone who needed it.